Kaya Wanju. I'm Celine Moyle. Welcome to the John Curtin Gallery today. It's a pleasure to be meeting here today on Wajak Puja, and let me begin by paying my respects to our elders past and present. We're here for Environmental Visions as part of our John Curtin Gallery Speaker Series talk, and this is in response to the exhibition you see here behind me, Enagaya, Imagining Energy Futures. And Enagaya is on until the 8th of May, and it sits alongside Isaac Julian for Perth Festival and Carolat Kulinga-Werin. So joining us today, we have Michelle Johnston, screen arts academic and filmmaker at Macassar, the School of Media, Creative Arts and Social Inquiry. And she is followed by Thor Kerr, researcher, writer, editor, many hats, as well as senior lecturer at Macassar as well. There will be plenty of time afterwards for questions and answers after their presentation, so please do stay on, and you're welcome to join us as well for coffee and tea afterwards. So this talk discusses experimental forms of filmmaking that challenge entrenched narrative structures and ways of engaging with documentary films on environmental issues. Please make Michelle feel welcome.
Hello, thank you for coming today, and thank you for your interest in our interactive documentary, My Green Planet, also known as an iDoc. My name is Michelle Johnston, and I produce this documentary in collaboration with my colleague Sally Goldrick and with several of our screen arts graduates and students here at Curtin. Before I talk about the documentary, I want to start off by talking a little bit about myself and my background, because it was my curiosity about interactive documentary that initiated this project. My whole career has been dedicated in one form or another to visual storytelling. And these stories have been, until recently, linear stories, which are the conventional stories that we see every time we watch TV or go to the cinema. I love telling visual stories, and I have contributed to their creation in the production of television programs with the ABC, programs with my students here at Curtin, and the production of several documentaries. One of those documentaries, called Heart Coming Home, was made in collaboration with this gallery, the John Curtin Gallery, and with Stolen Generation survivors from the Noongar Aboriginal community. And it reflects my desire to tell stories that contribute to social justice, create change, and facilitate the voices of underrepresented and misrepresented. So this is the type of work I love to do, and I aim to work in a participatory way that ensures the people who collaborate with me in making a documentary have a say in how their story is told. Most importantly, I believe in the power of storytelling to create change. A well-told story will engage an audience and ask them to think differently, to have a different perspective on an issue. Storytelling for me has always been linear. The story has a beginning, a middle and an end. And a well-told story is the difference between keeping an audience engaged and losing them to the next interesting thing. When I discovered interactive documentary several years ago, I was sceptical of its ability to engage and hold an audience. It seemed narrative and storytelling were no longer important in this form. I wanted to explore that idea. So what is interactive documentary? An interactive doco is usually accessed online on a website. They draw on the theory of a public sphere that recognises the media's role in democracy, that it is a source of information that contributes to the shaping of people's ideas and of public opinion. iDocs can connect the private space of media consumption with the public sphere because potentially they are more participatory. They can include multiple voices as participants in the doco, and those voices are often less mediated by the filmmaker. Audience or users actively participate as they navigate a website and make their own choices about the story in which they. My interest in interactive doco is, what does participation actually mean and look like? It must mean more than just clicking on a computer. And how does a non-linear narrative impact audience engagement in the documentary? This project is still in its early stages and I don't yet have answers to these questions as they relate to My Green Planet. But this is our story so far. Our project is very small compared to some other examples that are worth mentioning for those of you who are keen to learn a little bit more about iDocs. Interactive documentaries have been in production for over a decade. Easy access to the internet, broadband and technology to create the documentaries has led to some spectacular and creative projects. Many with million-dollar budgets and produced over several years. The Canadian Film Board has funded some of the most innovative projects, notably those by Katerina Sizek, such as High Rise and Out My Window. So the image you're looking at now is from Sizek's Out My Window, in which she has visited high-rise apartments and told the stories of people from all over the globe. So the users visit people's apartments, they enter them and listen to their stories firsthand, hear about how they live, where they live. Some of these early projects are so sophisticated that they can be difficult to access because you need special software to view them or high-powered broadband to download or stream. Beneath the Waves is a local WA museum interactive doco that is beautifully made but has a very linear story that's accessed like chapters in a book. And the Constable Care project is probably something that many of you are familiar with. This is more of a choose-your-own-adventure type of narrative, and users make choices about their pathway through the story in order to learn about the consequences of their ethical and personal safety choices. So participation in this example is more about the engagement of the user. iDocs have some clear advantages. Because they are accessed online, they have the potential for a bigger audience as long as there is awareness about a project. The documentary can grow and change with time. They're not subject to scheduling by broadcasters or cinemas and so may have a longer shelf life. And they can be accessed on mobile screens. They're not subject to the time restrictions of cinemas and broadcasters and so are free to take on a variety of forms and structures. As mentioned, I see the challenges for iDocs is in their design and their capacity for engaging narratives. So now to My Green Planet. We've collaborated with secondary school students at 3 high schools. We asked them to participate by producing art that visualised a clean energy future. The project was enthusiastically received by teachers and students, and I think this was because sustainability has recently become a priority for high school curriculum. Teachers are looking for resources in this space. I'm now going to show you a couple of segments from the doco. It starts with an intro that explains what the documentary is about, and then I'll show you one of the school stories. And it was very interesting to me to see how different were the responses of the students from each of the schools. So the one I'm going to show you is from the Colonial High School. And we discovered that the students there were very familiar with the technology that would contribute to net zero and well informed about what net zero will mean for a coal mining town like Collie.
My name is Curtin. I've been at Collie Senior High School for 38 years. I came as an art teacher and now head of arts. Collie is transitioning from pretty much mining based and power generation based to now a lot of tourism. The government has been putting in a lot of support and money to Collie, and so we have the mural trail, we have the Wellington Dam mural. The other teacher and I decided to do a mural based on sustainable energy, so we worked with the students through a process.
We watched a video and we had a PowerPoint about net zero and climate change, and then we looked up pictures that we thought would represent what the world would look like if we had fixed climate change. For Collie, net zero will mean getting rid of the coal farms and just trying to make the place more of a tourist than a energy powering place.
It's based on a staircase, and the steps going up are leading towards a green, sustainable earth. The figures climbing it are going to be an adult and a child. The adult's helping the child up and going to give them the green planet and a good place to live in the future.
As the youth of Collie, we've got to think about possibilities for new energies for Collie itself, since the mines will be closing, so that's coal power. Now I've instructed the students to look on the internet for new and different ways for sustainable energy.
Using just things like that could maybe just send a little bit of a message saying like, oh, inventor of electricity, kind of improving on the idea of like solar power. Yeah, it's not done yet, but I do see it just being more of a visual message than a straight up like explanation to our problems.
Responding visually to a science issue, what is possible, so other people can see it and view it and say, well, yes, we could have wind turbines, Collie, we could have electric cars going up and down our streets, definitely, and everyone can have like solar panels.
Our project's called A Brighter Future, and it represents how we can use sustainable energy such as wind farming to enhance our future's way of making energy instead of harsher ways.
So I'll be 44 in 2050.
I'd think I'd be near 30, 40 by then. And I'd like to see myself living somewhat of a renewable lifestyle, you know, helping the environment in any way I can, maybe promoting green energy through film and stuff. That'd be a nice development in the future.
I will see myself trying to contribute as much as I can to the new norm is for energy.
If we keep on emitting carbon and other greenhouse gases, then the temperature's going to keep rising, and really it's just going to get too hot to sustain human life. But like in Collie, it's based heavily around the mining industry, so there won't be jobs in the future, and I understand how the government can't sort of shut it off completely, otherwise people are put out of jobs, but I'm not sure how politicians are going to get the right balance. That's what scares me at the moment, is trying to get the right balance.
After each of the school stories, there's a collection of the students' artwork, and users are able to click on the artwork, see the full frame, and there's a little message there from the students about their artwork, a little artist statement. Okay, so we use a software called Clint, which is just one option now available that makes the production of an iDoc possible for anybody with basic computer and video production skills. Software like this also makes the project more accessible to users and on multiple devices. This is a screenshot of our storyboard for My Green Planet, and it demonstrates the choices we have made as creators for how people can navigate their way through the website. Seeing people engage with documentary here at the gallery has been interesting for me, because I can see the importance of design for the iDoc and how users understand the story. Ideally, the iDoco should include some kind of call to action that will make it even more participatory. As As we consult and grow the website, ideas for that will emerge. I plan to include a quiz on carbon footprint created by daily choices about what we eat and how we travel, and also possibly links to external websites such as the UN 13 Goals for Sustainability. We plan to interview the teachers who worked with us to get feedback on students' engagement with the doco and how we might grow it in the future. And it would be great to see My Green Planet used more broadly as an education resource. This is one of the images, one of the artworks that came from the school that's available in the iDoc. Judith Aston is a well-known researcher and creator in this documentary form and asked our interactive doco to remain open-ended. She says, interactive doco can help us explore multiple points of view in a genuinely transcultural and interdisciplinary way. I hope to discover for myself how iDocs can do that effectively. In the meantime, I think My Green Planet has achieved several of the goals we set for ourselves. It's given a voice to young people about their future, encouraged them to engage with politics. It has demonstrated how art can be activism, established a sustainability teaching and learning resource for schools, and it's been an outreach activity for the university by engaging with a diverse range of high schools. So the project will eventually be online. It's not there yet, but maybe today or tomorrow. We've had a bit of a technical problem with that. But when it's available, you'll be able to see it at www.mygreenplanet.au. Thank you. I will hang on.
Thank you for coming along. Thanks for your time. We're going to be talking about the FarNearFutureNow exhibit, which is just around the corner, how it came about and what we're attempting to do with it. The title of this talk, Space-Time Rebellion, may indicate what we're really trying to do. Let's see how we go. Okay, this project in a way has its roots back in University of Twente. They had an ethics of technologies centre. Really interesting work around technologies and science not being neutral, but there was always a political element, if you like, to science. And one of the most interesting dissertations, or PhD dissertations, to come out of Twente in the 1990s, I think it was Adrian Labrua's work, and he basically he was doing discourse analysis, textual analysis, and he looked at the documents coming out of the US Atomic Agency between 1945 and 1972, once they became available. He was basically looking at sets of minutes, press releases, all sorts of documents coming out of the US Atomic Agency. And what he found, the question of his research was really around nuclear waste. How did the Atomic Energy Agency deal with the problem of nuclear waste? And he found that they solved the problem of nuclear waste not through new technology, but by envisaging new technology. So what happened over the course of many decades is that an argument emerged within the agency that said that went along the lines of the nuclear waste problem isn't really a problem because we'll invent a technology in the future to deal with it. And this went on for years and years. And what he found through looking at the minutes of meetings of the agency is that anybody who kind of questioned that idea that in the future there may not be a technology to deal with nuclear waste, anybody who asked that question, their name would then disappear from future minutes. They were no longer invited back to the meetings. The nuclear waste problem was solved discursively by saying that in the future we'll have a solution to this problem. And that enabled nuclear development to go ahead in the US without the problem of worrying about the waste. And today the problem of nuclear waste is often something that we don't pay much attention to until you have a disaster like Fukushima, when you realize that all the nuclear rods, all the waste product from the nuclear power plant is basically stacked up in the ceiling, which is kind of how I deal with my waste that I can't get rid of. I stick it up in the ceiling of the house, which is a major problem when you have a big nuclear facility. So this kind of informed much of my thinking around subsequent research. My PhD was on environmental discourse on a project down at Fremantle, and it was a really major development, a $6 million development that would bring new technology to this region that would solve the problem of, or help solve the problem of climate change, because it would have a zero carbon operating environment, or at least that's what the developer wanted. That project was rejected by the local community because they managed to demonstrate that in the here and now, locally and immediately, that project will cause massive environmental destruction and will produce mountains of carbon emissions. So through doing that research, I could see that the environmental struggles and how well you manage to maintain the spatial and temporal framework. In order to deal with a problem, you'll often find a developer or a proponent of technologies pushing it way into the future. We will come up with a solution to deal with this. You'll often find that resistance is staged in the local immediate, that this will ruin a local cultural or natural environment and cause massive immediate problems. So what we can see if we think about the environmental politics, whether it's on television, newspaper, film, a lot of it, at least to me, is about the scale of the problems that are being talked about, and also the kind of the temporal and spatial framing of the problem. So that's one element of kind of theory that goes into this work. The other is really about, and you see a book in the background, it's when I think about visualizing future energy representation through the research I've been doing for many years, I see that there's also a kind of fiction, and I'm not the only theorist to see this. There's a kind of a storyline that tends to be portrayed. There's often key kind of narrative resources that are used in telling the story of environmental solution through technology. So looking back to actual science fiction is really helpful in understanding environmental arguments and non-fiction representation of environmental issues. Science fiction really emerged out of the whole movement around colonialism. It came up out of the stories of the Lost World, where you'd have typically an Anglo hero who would somehow get lost or caught or fall down a hole or go through a tunnel and end up in maybe in a landscape like Jurassic Park, where there would often be a dark-skinned tribe. There'd be a relationship between the hero and a member of the tribe, and then they would lead a rebellion and deal with some kind of dictator or some kind of evil person, and there'll often be a civil war in that process. And that kind of framing of the science fiction story kind of then bled into newer forms of science fiction. And what I'm trying to say here, I guess, is that we can't really think about science in our own environment without dealing with the production of science fiction, particularly in a place like Western Australia, where so much of our environmental issues are focused around resource extraction. How do we deal with resource extraction and think about it, think about the politics of that? That's where I think science fiction or theory, literary theory around science fiction becomes really handy, because this whole process of going in and extracting something is very much a colonial practice and something we have to deal with and live with today. The other field of research or theory that I looked at is also to do with screen arts theory around scale and the cosmic zoom, and that's been really helpful, and we've purposefully incorporated some of those ideas into our work. Okay, so in order to produce the FarNearFutureNow work, it was really a question of the project being stimulated by Stuart Bender, who was here a moment ago, and Rachel Robertson, but then me having an opportunity to go out and find some collaborators to work with me. The first collaborator was Hafiz Rahman, and we talked about doing some kind of storytelling around environmental technology. And Hafiz had been working on iPads and mobile phones and these little pyramid projections, holographic projections, which were being used in medical education programs around, around visualizing body parts. So from talking to Hafiz, I kind of came up with the idea, well, we can make a hologram, but what would this hologram do, and how would we relate it to the environment, and what kind of storyline could we have start with and then disrupt in some way? And we came to the conclusion Or for me, what popped into my mind is, from talking to Hafiz, was that, this is Princess Leia, this is the Princess Leia hologram. And that was pretty helpful because one of my PhD students who worked on the project, Raymond Renfeld, had been doing case studies on social movements, environmental movements, and he'd been doing in and around podcast recording for radio. And he found that there was a general reluctance in Extinction Rebellion to go on radio and do a podcast. It just wasn't maybe that interesting or exciting for them because they're so caught up in the social media world. As soon as we mentioned that it's the Princess Leia hologram that we're thinking of making, members of Extinction Rebellion came on board with the project. There was a kind of a resonance of Princess Leia that just everybody kind of seemed to know and everybody wanted to be a part of. So a lot of resources came flowing and people came flowing into the project once we talked about Princess Leia and the hologram. So this is Les, Emily and Talia. They came volunteered their time. They're from Extinction Rebellion. They came down and we filmed them green screen for this project. And I'm going to play a little bit of what they did and what they said. The purpose, what I wanted to achieve with Extinction Rebellion is to shift them away from being represented in media as a kind of irrational kind of group that turns up in the city, protests, lies down on the road. One of the reasons it works that way is that traditional environmentalism is often staged around protecting trees or a dam, and you'll have environmentalists up a tree or chained to something, and sometimes they're up there for weeks, and their purpose isn't to get arrested, their purpose is to protect that local, very, very local piece of the environment. But with Extinction Rebellion around the world, part of the purpose is to get arrested, it's to get on the news, it's a very different thing. And they don't have that kind of spatial immediacy to rely on to tell their story, and they can often be quite irrational. So what I wanted to do with the storyline, drawing on Star Wars, is start out with a storyline that would start to tell an environmental story. Ethically, we wanted to start it on Aluma country in the Pilbara, where much of the resource extraction is going on, and the biggest environmental destruction in a way is going on up there. We wanted to start there and juxtapose a cosmic zoom of planet Earth with a First Nation person talking about the problem, standing at the fence, if you like, defending her country from disruption by industry. And then we basically wanted to show how her voice was being disrupted by a kind of a spectacular representation of future energy. Conveniently, we had the government's transformational energy plan that we used on. We wanted to show it all with bells and whistles and being very spectacular, a little bit irrational, a bit like Extinction Rebellion on the TV news. And then what we wanted to do was follow with the voices of Extinction Rebellion, which I'll play now, to show that they're deeply conservative, deeply irrational, and very, very thoughtful. Not at all the sort of thing you would see on the television news. So without further ado, I will try and play you a few minutes of this. Thank you.
It's empty. It hasn't got any substance at all. It's just a cop-out, in my view.
Help us, near future now. You're our only hope.
Their net zero plan is pretty disgraceful, if you can call it a plan. And I was trying to have a think about how to summarise that. I guess it comes down to two main things, and one being that it's economically and financially irresponsible, and two, that they're relying on technology that's not proven and not viable. Spending money in new infrastructure for fossil fuels to transition to renewables is ridiculous. As far as the economy goes, we're going to be left with a stranded asset. So while it may be good for the profits of a few people today, it's our children that will be left with these stranded assets. So far, all of the movement we've seen towards renewables has been based on the citizens' own actions, which is the uptake of solar. Carbon capture and storage. It hasn't been proved yet how well it works. We don't know what the safety and efficiency of it all is, and if it is a viable thing.
When I hear them talking about gas-led transitions, I just get so angry. They are morally repugnant. Their policies at the moment will do nothing but increase the level of CO2 and methane going into the atmosphere. And if they follow that trajectory, there's no way that they can possibly meet the targets that they say they're going to meet. The fundamental problem is that they're being paid by the big corporates. It's quite fortunate that power generated from renewables is by far the cheapest of all power sources at the moment. It's just astonishing that the governments and the coal-producing corporates just don't come on board and develop these things. The government needs right now, immediately, without any time to waste, to start implementing programs that will upgrade the electricity networks, that will provide social support for people who may lose employment over the changes and the transitions. They need to build all sorts of infrastructure. There's plenty of technology there that's tried and works. There's nothing to stop the government from, or the corporations from implementing these processes. A thing that's really missing at the moment is leadership.
Please, FarNearFutureNow. There are things that we can't sacrifice. So we need to check in on each other as well, regenerate our communities, keep looking after everything is by looking after each other. You can't walk past and go about your life and think it's nothing to do with you, or it won't impact you, or you can't do anything, because as a whole, we can do something, and we all have to do a little bit, our own part. Don't feel powerless. That's what all these big companies and things that are destroying the earth want us to feel. This is going to take all of us. If you feel strongly about the destruction that continues to happen to our native environment, to ancient cultural sites, if that upsets you, then help us. Please do something. Come out on the streets.
We are just ordinary people from all walks of life who are incredibly and sadly very concerned about the future of our children.
Anything short of being disruptive to key parts of the system at this point in history is pretty much a death sentence. It's not going to shift fast enough unless there's a very real material threat to that kind of entrenched power.
So just to reiterate, I guess what we really think about it theoretically, I really wanted to engage with Spinoza's kind of theory of the ethics to show that there are different rationalities, and kind of all rationalities matter and need to be taken seriously. One final word on the materials and the choice of using a television and acrylic, partly because those resources are widely available. We hope that this might become a model that can be used in local towns, perhaps for telling stories about local environmental issues. Acrylic is becoming widely available because as COVID ends, all this acrylic will be taken down off, presumably off shop fronts and away from cashiers. So we'll have a ton of acrylic lying around that can be cut up and turned into pyramids. So that's it for my presentation, and we'll go to question and answers, and I might just start with a question to Michelle. Thank you. My only question to Michelle, my main question is, it's such a beautiful piece of work with all this potential, My Green Planet. My question is, what are the next steps, and how do you move from the environment, an offline environment, into a kind of an online environment, and how will you try to develop a project from there next year?
So hopefully the progression to online won't be too hard. We have tech staff working on that at the moment, and the problem is not so much with the migrating from desktop to online. It's about getting the right space on which to upload it. So hopefully that will be solved fairly soon. So I think actually getting it online is one of the easiest parts of it, and the software that we're using makes that very easy. My hope for the future is that it becomes more participatory, because that is the aspect of iDocs that I'm most interested in exploring. So at the moment, we have participation from the schools. They have created art, they have done interviews with us, and their voices are now available online. But the participation by users is pretty limited at this point. So I'm looking for how we can engage users, audiences to a higher degree. So hence the ideas of calls to action, including elements in the doco that make people want to act and do something about the issue.
So I had a question for you, Tor, that kind of picks up that Michelle's answer to you. And first may say that both really excellent books, so interesting, and both projects have been wonderful. And I hope they are disseminated widely, including in the schools. So my question for is, you were saying perhaps this technology or this form of thinking about environmental activism could be used. Can you elaborate a little on what you think you and your team could do next with FarNearFuture?
I think what I'd really like to do, and I've just started to speak with some of our team members, is really to take it into country towns where, particularly maybe closer to, I'm thinking of a town like Ravensthorpe, where you have a very big lithium mine, and you have daily explosions at lunchtime, because you hear the mine going off. You can also see the buildings start to tip down the hill as the water gets drawn out, the groundwater gets drawn out for the mine. It's a really important mine, but it's also, people in that town have a right to speak about it and think about it. So taking it somewhere like a town like that would be wonderful, where we can replicate the project, maybe show the existing work, try to maybe take a mobile green screen down and work with local community, with them as local filmmakers and editors, to produce some kind of work like this. So we also transfer a method of storytelling, but also some screen art skills into a town where some amazing stories could get told from a town like that, because it's going through such a radical transformation. Whether it's it's a town of 450 people or so, but you might have 2,000 mine workers, many from overseas coming in, living in containers and living in the local pub. So going places that are radically impacted by mining, particularly maybe mining for battery materials and technologies that will help solve the environmental crisis. I think it would be good to capture their voices and just to provide platforms for them to discuss these issues.
I've got a question for both of you. I'm curious, because the project, this exhibition is all about the environment, and as a practitioner itself, like where does that, where do you find you had sort of crossovers there, where maybe you were conscious of the resources you were consuming in the production of your project? And I know you mentioned the use of acrylic and television. Was that part of the consciousness of thinking in regards to that? Were there any other applications that you considered?
I think, yeah, definitely to use a television is the right idea. I wanted to use a television from the school, but it turns out we don't have any spare televisions. So we ended up buying one for this, but it was now the property of the school. But the idea of doing something where it's mostly a screen, that form of projection that we've got, you can do it without a pyramid. You could just do it with a piece of acrylic. The models that the pilots we started working with were basically iPads with the film that you use for projection, the traditional kind of projection film that you use in universities. So there's a lot of that lying around, and you can get it from Officeworks. Once we go to scale, you have to get it fabricated, and this was a bit of an experiment, and we had to use new acrylic. Anyway, that's a bit of a regret. For me, using a new material, I'd rather use second-hand materials. But I think if we're doing future iterations, now that we know what we're doing, we can help people to work with whatever screens they have in place, whatever size, and yeah, provide support for people to do it with second-hand equipment, ideally.
Yeah, I'm just trying to think what sort of impact we have had on the environment in making this documentary. And I think it's been pretty limited. And certainly the students we were working with were pretty aware of what they were consuming in making their art. So there was a student from Penrose, one of the schools we worked with, who made resin discs, all these amazing colours and patterns. And she had collected all the leftover resin from the other students from their projects and used it to create her project because she was conscious of not wasting anything. Somebody else had made a piece of art that was discarded plastic bags and turned it into a jellyfish. So it's certainly front of mind for the students in their art making. And yeah, the sort of technology we use in making the documentary itself is pretty limited impact. Let's start. Has video documentary changed your perception of yourself as a visual storyteller, or do you find that the multifaceted storyboard has really opened up to how to visualise storytelling? Personally, it hasn't changed my mind about the importance of story and my desire to work in that storytelling space. So I'm still very much attached to linear stories, and I'm still waiting to be convinced that that this is a better way. So I think at the moment I acknowledge it's a different way, and therefore it has its benefits, and that's the thing I wanted to continue to explore. The benefits are about participation and about access to the public sphere and about encouraging media democracy. That's all connected to participation, and so I will continue to explore the potential for that. But no, at the moment I'm an old-fashioned linear storyteller, and there's evidence of plenty of little linear stories in that documentary. So yeah, time will tell. Is there anything else?